Good day, folks. We'll call this recording a discussion of feminism. Any discussion of feminism has to acknowledge the sheer fact of the social construction of gender. You know, for most of human history, so-called natural differences have been used to justify the unequal treatment of women in society. We're talking about unequal opportunity in education, unequal opportunity in employment, unequal opportunity in politics across the board. Women were once thought incapable of succeeding in college merely by sheer fact of their biological makeup. So our cultural suppositions are more rooted in our social constructions of what is natural rather than the biological fact of the differences between men and women. Let's acknowledge the difference between sex and gender. Sex tends to refer to biological differences between men and women, between males and females, right? The phrase sex refers to who we are as males and females. Now, the phrase gender refers to the social and cultural significance we attach to those presumed biological differences. So, as we just said, sex refers to who we are as male and female, but gender refers to who we become as men and women, which occurs through socialization, how we identify, even if you don't identify as being a man or a woman, being male or female. So when we look at sex and we look at gender, then what we also have to look at is gender inequality and gender stratification. Let's use that term. You should write that down. Gender stratification refers to the unequal distribution of wealth, power, the unequal distribution of privilege between men and women in a society. Men and women differ in their access to the benefits of society, and traditionally, men have been first in line when it comes to who gets what, when, and how. Remember that famous Harold Laswell quote. Okay, so remember we just said sex is a biologically determined characteristic, while gender is a socially constructed characteristic. Now let's proceed with our discussion today. Let's think about the phrase oppression. And as we do, I want to bring to your attention the 1983 writing. Sorry, I'm messing things up here a little bit. All right, there we go. All right, I bring to your attention the 1983 writings of Marilyn Frye. Marilyn Frye once told us that presses are used to mold things or to flatten them or to reduce them in bulk. Sometimes to reduce them by squeezing out the gases or liquids in them. Something pressed is something caught between or among forces and barriers, which are so related to each other that jointly they restrain, restrict, or prevent that thing's motion or mobility. Any understanding of gender stratification has to be conditioned, right? Has to be conditioned to help us understand the nature of gender oppression. Remember, we tend to think about things in terms of a big three, right? Race, class, gender. So what are the facts of racial oppression? What are the myths of class oppression? And what can we know for sure about gender oppression? Even as we consider it, let's think about the 1903 writings Du Bois talked about in Souls of Black Folk. He gives us a conception of double consciousness, and it is always worth reading a good paragraph of Du Bois. Du Bois tells us it is a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. Now, he's talking about, he's using a racial analysis, right? But let's think about this in terms of gender. One ever feels his two-ness. Du Bois says an American and a Negro, but how about either being male or female, caught in that essential biological dichotomy. Two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideas in one dark body whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. He says the history of American Negro is the history of this strife, but perhaps we can say the history of gender relations and gender stratification is the history of this strife, this longing to attain self-consciousness. He says the phrase manhood, but how about personhood? To merge one's double self into a better and a truer self. In this merging, one wishes neither of the older selves to be lost. He does not wish to. Du Bois is talking about Africanize America, for America has too much to teach the world. He couldn't bleach his Negro blood in a flood of white Americanism, for he knows that Negro blood has a message for the world. One simply wishes to make it possible for a person to be both Negro and American without being cursed and spit upon by his fellows, without having the doors of opportunity closed roughly in his face. While Du Bois is talking, Du Bois using a racial analysis, can we think about double consciousness in the terms of a gender-based analysis, that one is always feeling the tug and the pull, the power dynamic, the gender stratification between being male and female, even if you don't feel like you were either one of them at one time or the other. So if oppression means that someone is pressed between two opposing forces that are linked together to put pressure on an individual, then oppression can be seen as a double bind. Oppressed people are expected to smile and be cheerful and to match the stereotypes imposed upon them by society. If one complies, then one signals your docility, the quiet acceptance, and thus passive participation in one's own oppression. However, if one does not comply, then one is called bitter, angry, dangerous, and might even be seen as a threat to the status quo, such a threat that violence is a reasonable option. Either way, there is a reduction of political space. There is a form of social erasure, not only from decision-making and autonomous agency, but also a devaluation of one's very life. Remember, we read our Frederick Engels, where he talked about alienation, how you can be taken away from your very conception of yourself. When we talk about oppression as a double bind, we have to think about the real world implications of that oppression, and we'll look at some of that in just a second. Ghettoization can occur and seems natural and justified as it arises, but we define it as being isolated in a powerless position. Beyond housing and, housing ghettos and racial ghettos, there are indeed gender ghettos, and the ghetto of the mind, where one believes that their subject position is the correct one for them to be in. So when we think about oppression as a double bind, hold on. When we think about oppression as a double bind, we acknowledge that women have certain pressures that are related to sexual activity. If one is active, then this woman may be subject to censure. She could be punished. She could be labeled as unprincipled, and she might be slut shamed. If one is abstinent, then she may be labeled as, she also may be subject to shaming. She can be called uptight, frigid, cold, and also subject to harassment. Either way, the double bind of this sexualized oppression is present. Shame and ostracization by related social pressures may press a woman into actions that she might otherwise not have taken. For women, this shaming, even if not directly related to sexual activity, this shaming also has real world implications. Gender discrimination, sexual harassment, societally generated, yet self-imposed expectations about the roles a woman should play as a daughter, a sister, a wife, a mother, etc. Dress in this way can be, dress in this context can be critical. If a woman dresses one way, she appears not to care about herself. If a woman dresses another way, then she may be categorized as unladylike. At this point, if we were doing this in a face-to-face fashion, I would find a way gently to talk about the gender roles that each of us experience, right? So I want you to think about how you're living in your life, how you're living in your household, how you are socializing with your friends, how you relate to people of the opposite sex. And I want you to think about what type of roles you are playing, right? What type of roles you are playing. Outside sexual activity roles, this is not that class. So we're still talking about oppression. It can be hard to see. It can be even difficult to analyze, even if you know that it's happening to you. And thus, oppression can be hard to escape. So the key to the situation is to realize that if one's life is confined by forces that are beyond your control, forces that are not accidental, but these forces that serve to oppress one person for the elevation of another, if these forces are systematic and related to each other such that it results in a reduction of choice by an entire group of people, then that, my friends, is what we would call oppression, right? Now, we know that uh, there's a rather an intersection, I messed up the word. There's an intersection between race and gender in the society. And then when we combine race and gender, and then cross-section it with a class analysis, we can see that at the focal point in the United States, I can't do it with three fingers, right? The focal point in the United States, you have Black women, right? And so if feminism is a counter-reaction to the oppressive societal constructions, then there is a group of women in the United States who really have a prima facie evidence of the need for feminism. Some factoids, please. 38% of women have served in Congress. And well, I want to tell you, I'm getting these factoids, a group of people whose name escapes me right now, but the link is down here on this slide. These folks in the lead up to the 2018 midterm elections, they put together a Black women's voter guide, and it was really good. And I'm quoting this from them. All right. Only 38% of women, Black women, only 38 Black women, let me get it straight, have served in Congress in the past 50 years. Black women are 7.3% of the population, but Black women are only 3.6% members of all of Congress and only 3.7% of all state legislators. There is a need there, right? 66% of Black women work full-time. Black women are the fastest growing segment of entrepreneurs in the United States, voting at higher rates than other demographics, outpacing other demographics in the attainment of bachelor degrees. However, Black women only make 63% for every dollar that a white man makes. Black women tend to have a median wealth around $200 and are still significantly underrepresented at all levels of government and also underrepresented in the highest ranks of corporate America. I should be watching my time on this recording, but I'm on a roll. Now, let's define what feminism is. Feminism, at bottom, feminism holds that women should have equality with men, that women should be free as men. That's the definition I would want to receive from you on a test. What is feminism? Feminism is the belief that women should be equal to men, that women should be free as men. Women must have as much autonomy as men enjoy. The feminist is one who opposes societal structures that put women into cultural, political, and economic positions of inferiority. In order to do this, the feminist is also critiquing the law. She is challenging the structures of society. She is questioning long-held beliefs. It is the feminist that looks to confront social customs and is working to reverse the cultural images that reinforce patriarchy. It is the feminist that believes that all people should be empowered to participate in collective decision-making. And when people are denied this power, the agency that is doing the denying, then that agency is being oppressive. We just said that feminism believes that all people, in particular women, should be allowed to participate in collective decision-making. Remember, we earlier talked about the beliefs of Frederick Douglass, right? The beliefs of Tecumseh, and how Chico Mendes, the Brazilian rainforest activist, how all three of those folks believed that equality meant the ability to participate in the collective decision-making process about the land or about other structures of society. Okay, let's keep going, right? If you're tired, you can pause this recording, but I want to make sure I get all this thought in one sitting. Okay, so we just said here that we earlier just said that the feminist is looking to critique the structure of society and holds that any element that's looking to hold women back so that men can be elevated in that context, that element there is being patriarchal. Let's define what patriarchy is. A patriarchy is a system that's based on a sexual hierarchy with men in the superior position. And the patriarchy is looking to keep women in a dependent, subordinated, exploited position. Now, patriarchy has existed throughout the history of the Western world in particular, and through various cultures. Every culture on the planet tends to have, not every culture, let me not say it that hard. Many cultures tend to have patriarchal elements to it. Okay. Now, so not every man has exercised power over women, but men as a group have long held the most power within the society and have used this power to further their own interests at the expense of women. That is the details, the factual history of patriarchy. Let's do some empiricism. You'll remember something is empirical when it is observable to the five senses. So let's say a few things about patriarchy before we end this discussion. We can say that women have been denied equality of resources. Here's some facts. In 1980, the United Nations pointed to the following disparity. Although women represent 50% of the world's population, women only owned 1% of the Earth's property. 50% of the world's population, and in 1980 only owned 1% of the Earth's property. In 1995, the United Nations found that women worldwide tended to be paid 30 to 40% less than men performing the same work. And all right, let's keep going. Women have been denied equality of educational opportunities. Women compose 2/3 of the Earth's illiterate population. We just said that 50% of the world is women. I think nowadays it's like 55% of the world is women. However, 2/3 of the Earth's illiterate population are women. 66%, right? That's a lot. Women have been denied equality of respect. In some countries, girls are not respected and valued as highly as the boys. And as a result, females in some countries have been aborted or flat out killed through infanticide. In China, for example, in the early 1900s, 10,000 ultrasound machines were being manufactured every year. These machines are suspected to have been used to facilitate abortions of females by families who prefer to have sons. Women have been denied equal protection from violence. Worldwide, women are particularly vulnerable to violence, including violence perpetrated by family members. A study of England and Wales once found that 45% of female homicides were perpetrated by the spouses or the former spouses and partners, whereas only 6% of male homicides were similarly committed by women who were present or former spouses or partners. What in the world? In the United States, a woman suffers a battering every 18 minutes. And in Latin America, women's concerns over their vulnerability to violent attack by men has prompted the organization of more than 100 women's associations. Women have been denied equal protection by the state. Political institutions have established preferential systems whereby laws and policies discriminate against women and favor male interests. For example, in Peru and in Egypt, husbands may legally beat their wives if they suspect them of adultery. In Brazil, the judicial system has recognized the legal defense arguments in criminal cases, suggesting that a man's violence against a woman is justifiable if that woman has wounded the man's honor. That's in Brazil. And in the United States, you'll remember with me, it wasn't until 1920 that women enjoyed the federal protection of the right to vote. So, looking at these empirical facts, it is clear that there is the existence of a sexual hierarchy, of gender stratification, and the feminist further contends that patriarchy is held up as legitimate and justifiable by the teachings of numerous religions, by the teachings of intellectual traditions, and just by the cultural norms that are not perpetrated, that are reproduced by authorities. So we'll call this a beginning, something to think about as you start to think about what feminism is. We'll keep on going later. Thank you for listening. I'm going to stop the recording as soon as I find the button.